Hi everyone. Tonight we're stepping directly into a medieval hall, one of those enormous spaces where centuries of smoke have darkened the rafters, and the only steady source of heat, light, and cooked food comes from a large open fire. You can practically feel your eyes prick already as smoke thickens in the air, winding upward, catching in your nose, and settling into your hair. Long-term survival in this environment would be difficult. Human lungs were never meant to inhale indoor campfires smoke daily. But for the medieval household, this smoky hearth was essential. Before we settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy the content. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights and let's begin. The fire isn't just a cooking spot, it is the central pulse of the home. You crouch near it because your feet are freezing, and you quickly notice the fire multitasking. It dries damp clothes, heats water for ale, and, at least in the beliefs of the time, keeps harmful spirits away. The unevenly burning logs spit small sparks, which jump and fade on the packed earth floor. A heavy iron pot hangs from a chain, releasing the scent of a stew that hints at onions, barley, and maybe a sliver of pork if it's a fortunate day. You lean back to look around. The hearth sits in the exact middle of the hall, not tucked against a wall with a chimney as modern eyes might expect, but placed centrally so everyone can access its heat. The roof stretches high and dark above you, with a vent or small hole where smoke is supposed to escape. In practice, much of it drifts sideways, leaving the entire hall shrouded in a constant gray mist. Historians still debate whether medieval people became accustomed to breathing this, or simply had no alternative. Imagine preparing dinner each evening with watery eyes, coughing at the soot, yet still grateful because at least there is fire. It's widely accepted that fires were essential for cooking and lighting, since candles and oil lamps were costly for most families. But there's also an interesting detail. Some homes had areas in the rafters where hams and sausages were hung to cure slowly in the smoke. So although your lungs may have struggled, your food was improving quietly above you. The smoke wasn't only unavoidable, it was part of the flavor. Cooking here is straightforward and instinctive. Ingredients go in the pot one handful at a time, with little attention to exact amounts. A scoop of barley, a turnip, a bit of ale. Simple wooden spoons, darkened from constant use over the flames, stir the simmering mixture. The sounds, the quiet popping of the stew, the shifting logs, the subtle creak of the pot's chain, form a kind of rhythmic background to daily survival. You're watching the earliest version of a kitchen, stripped to its most essential elements. If you were to step outside, you'd notice how the smoke clings to your clothes. Villagers carried this scent everywhere, a natural reminder of home life. You might wonder if people back then found the smell comforting or simply normal. A modern visitor might recoil, but perhaps a medieval partner would have seen it as familiar and warm. Cooking over an open hearth also required constant attention. Embers had to be carefully preserved overnight so they wouldn't go out. Relighting a fire from scratch was tedious. No matches, no lighters, just flint and determination. Families guarded their glowing coals closely, treating them almost like valuables. And if someone's fire died, borrowing hot coals from a neighbor wasn't just polite, it was necessary. Meals were simple for most people. Think thick pottages and grain-based stews, always simmering, sometimes for days, with whatever scraps could be added. Meat was uncommon for peasants, though bones might deepen the flavor. Bread, if available, often came in dense rye or barley loaves, served alongside the stew when flour was on hand. Dark, dense bread, not the soft white loaves reserved for the wealthy, was the daily staple. Eating meant tearing off a chunk of this heavy loaf, dipping it into the shared pot, and hoping it softened enough to chew. Picture the children nearby, warming their hands and waiting for dinner. They aren't watching a screen, but instead the firelight moving along the walls. The hall fills with everyday conversations, the crackle of burning wood, and the constant mix of smoke and cooking aromas. And yes, your hair will smell like campfire tomorrow, but in this world, that's normal. What stands out is how much the hearth meant beyond cooking. It reflected status. A large fire showed you had extra wood and could welcome neighbors or travelers. It was also a place for shared stories. Around the flames, news spread, songs were sung and tales retold. Fire represented warmth, food, and community all at once. It's easy to forget that a kitchen wasn't a separate space. It was the center of the home. You can hear the pot as it simmers. Smell onions softening in fat. And you realize that medieval people didn't just prepare meals here, they lived here. As sparks rise toward the beams, you look up and see shadows drifting and shifting, making the hall feel alive. Fire colors everything in shades of orange and black, and medieval cooks saw the same thing. It's interesting to think how today's clean, tiled kitchens evolved from this smoky, lively core. Yet the feeling of food cooking and people gathering remains unchanged. From here, the story moves deeper into these smoky homes, where even chimneys struggled to manage the fire. Your eyes still sting. But tonight, you look upward, trying to understand how medieval people tolerated such conditions. Cooking without chimneys is the next challenge, and it's a serious one. You rub your eyes, cough into your sleeve, and wonder how anyone could eat in a room where soot coated the ceiling and the air felt thick. The houses you enter are humble, made of timber and daub, with thatched roofs and small windows that barely let in light. There is no chimney to draw the smoke away. No practical system to keep air breathable. Instead, the hearth sits in the middle of the room, the fire glowing steadily as the smoke is meant to drift upward through a hole in the roof. Sometimes it escapes. Often it doesn't. On bad days, smoke hangs in place like an unwanted guest, pushing you lower to the floor where the air is lighter. It's well known that chimneys were uncommon in early medieval homes and only began to spread later, especially among the wealthy. But in most peasant cottages, smoke moved poorly, coating rafters, walls, and even lungs. Scholars still debate whether these smoky spaces caused long-term health issues or if people simply adapted in ways modern medicine doesn't fully explain. Through the haze, you notice the creative attempts people made. Some families hung mats or wooden hoods above the hearth to guide the smoke upward, though these sometimes caught fire. Others leaned boards at angles to help direct the smoke, making the room look more like a temporary work area than a living space. And some resourceful families built small smoke lofts under the roof, improvised rooms where meat was cured and, at times, where people slept, since insects avoided the smoky air. Imagine telling a visitor that the loft above isn't just for storage but also doubles as a bug-free bedroom. You shift uncomfortably, aware that no matter how much you try, there's simply no avoiding the smoke. Yet people once viewed it differently. Smoke was a normal part of daily life. A kind of seasoning, a cleaner, even a protector. Some believed it kept evil spirits away, and if your home carried that sharp scent, you were considered safe. Children run around the fire, their eyes stinging like yours, but they don't complain. For them, this is the familiar atmosphere of home. The soft crackle of burning wood is their lullaby, and the smoky air their version of a nightlight. Your shoulders relax as you imagine how tiring it must have been for mothers who stirred pots in this environment, coughing quietly but continuing anyway, because meals had to be made regardless of conditions. When you look inside wealthier homes, the scene changes. Basic chimneys start to appear, large stone structures that funnel smoke upward, though not perfectly. These early designs were costly and usually found in manors or castles. For most villagers, the concept of a chimney felt almost magical, as distant as owning a cup made of gold. You sit still and let the irony settle. Something you consider ordinary today, the ability to cook without choking on smoke, was once a sign of high status. Another detail catches your attention. Because of the constant smoke, the interior walls turned black, forming what we now call a patina. Some researchers think this layer may have acted like early insulation, sealing small gaps. Others believe it simply made the room dimmer and heavier in appearance. You wonder whether families felt pride or embarrassment seeing their darkened beams. Was it a symbol of age and endurance, proof the home had survived many seasons? Or was it just another inconvenience accepted because there were no alternatives? You kneel again by the hearth. A pot sways over the fire, bubbling with pottage while shadows dance across the walls. Your eyes burn and your throat feels rough, but you begin to understand that cooking back then wasn't just work. It required endurance. People had to battle the elements inside their own homes, handling smoke with patience and routine. To the medieval mind, this wasn't suffering. It was simply life. You close your eyes and picture nights when storms raged outdoors. Rain seeped through the thatch roof, sizzling where it touched the fire. Smoke thickened. You coughed harder but guarded the embers like something precious. The fire flickered, the food cooked slowly, and the scent of barley and onion pushed through the haze to remind you why the effort mattered. Even in thick smoke, comfort waited in the bowl. The truth settles over you like the ash on your skin. Cooking without chimneys wasn't a design flaw, it was the best most people could manage. A smoky room wasn't a failure. It was home. You rub your eyes once more as the haze becomes part of the background. The story continues, and the fire keeps burning. You blink through the smoke and your attention shifts to the cooking tools scattered beside the fire. Preparing food in a medieval home didn't depend on smooth countertops or modern appliances, but on a small collection of stone, clay, and iron items that seem simple yet feel meaningful when held. You touch the cool surface of a clay pot, rough, uneven, shaped by hand on a wheel or sometimes without one. Its sides are dark where flames marked it, each stain telling the story of past meals. It's widely known that iron gradually took the place of pottery in many households, though clay pots remained extremely common among peasants. Iron was stronger, heavier, and better for harsh flames. Clay, however, was inexpensive, easy to replace, and excellent for slow, steady cooking. Historians still debate whether clay pots affected flavor, whether their porous walls absorbed and later released subtle tastes like a kind of natural seasoning. Imagine your stew carrying hints of yesterday's onion broth. You pick up an iron cauldron next, its short legs and wide body cool and solid in your hands. Designed to rest among glowing embers rather than sit directly on a rack, it feels like the center of the kitchen, large enough to feed a household and sometimes an entire work team. Inside it, barley thickens, beans soften, and small bits of bacon add just enough richness to turn plain survival food into something people actually looked forward to. The cauldron is heavy, darkened with soot, and carries the scent of countless meals. You can't help but wonder how many generations have leaned over it, stirring with wooden paddles worn smooth at the edges. An interesting detail, not all medieval cookware was strictly practical. Archaeologists have found cauldrons and pans decorated with faces, animals, or geometric designs, small touches that made even simple meals feel almost ceremonial. It's as if the pot itself took part in the story, watching as you stirred and reminding you that food and ritual were always connected. Your eyes move to the frying pans, long-handled iron tools with shallow bowls made for flatbreads, pancakes, or a quick cook of eggs if they were available. Their long handles meant they could be held from a safer distance, a clear sign that fire wasn't controlled but constantly managed. The hiss of fat hitting the pan fills the hall with a crisp crackle, and you realize medieval cooks enjoyed the sounds of cooking just as much. Nearby sit stone mortars and pestles, essential for grinding herbs, mustard seeds, and nuts. The steady rhythm of grinding carries through the hall, a slow, consistent thud that feels almost soothing. Salt crystals break apart under the pestle. Spices release their aroma. Garlic becomes paste. It's slow, purposeful work, but calming in its own way. You picture someone by the fire, rhythmically crushing ingredients, humming as they prepare flavors that would turn a simmering pot into something memorable. Wooden ladles and spoons are everywhere, their surfaces darkened by heat and oil. A spoon here is more than a simple tool, it's a bridge between the pot and the people eating from it. Families might share a single ladle, dipping straight into the cauldron to taste or test. This isn't the sanitized world of separate plates and cutlery, it's communal, close, and sometimes messy. And if a spoon broke, another could be carved from nearby wood. Tools were replaceable but still felt personal. In the corner, you notice clay jugs and pitchers with wide mouths, sometimes covered with wax or cloth. These held ale, milk, or broth. Each jug is slightly different, like siblings in the same family. Their shapes feel natural and earthy, almost like holding a piece of the ground itself. And of course, knives. Every home had them, not only for cooking but as general-purpose survival tools. Some were wide, others narrow, some able to double as daggers. Cutting meat, chopping herbs, slicing bread, all needed a reliable blade. And while you might picture large iron cleavers, many kitchens depended on smaller knives, sharpened often and treated like dependable companions. Looking around, you notice that none of these tools are stored neatly in drawers. They lie scattered around, leaning against the hearth, resting on benches, hanging from beams. The medieval cook didn't separate kitchen space from living space. Tools blended into daily life, sitting beside spinning wheels, stools, and boots drying by the fire. What stays with you is the closeness of these objects. Every pot, pan, and spoon shows marks of use, scratches, burns, chips, repairs. Families rarely threw anything out unless it was beyond fixing. A cracked pot might be held together with metal staples. A dented pan could be hammered smooth again. Even damaged, these tools kept doing their job, showing that usefulness mattered far more than looks. Close your eyes and imagine the sounds: iron striking stone, wood scraping clay, stew bubbling, the steady beat of a pestle, and the sudden hiss of fat jumping from a pan. This was the soundtrack of daily life. Not precise, but rhythmic. Not polished, but full of spirit. And in the smoky hall, with rafters darkened above and tools scattered around, strewn around, you recognize a simple truth. Modern kitchens may shine with stainless steel, yet the medieval cook still had everything necessary. Fire, pots, knives, spoons, no timers, no devices, no electricity, only patience, effort, and a small set of tools that carried generations of meals in their worn surfaces. You leave the smoky hall and follow the faint sound of voices outside. A narrow path guides you to a low building at the edge of the village. It isn't a home, and it isn't a barn either. It's the communal bakehouse, and the warm, yeasty aroma reaches you long before the oven comes into view. Picture a domed structure, built from brick or clay, glowing from an earlier fire, its walls so hot they radiate like sunlight. This is where bread, the foundation of medieval diets, truly begins. A widely known fact is that many medieval European villages shared these ovens instead of maintaining private ones. Wood was expensive, oven construction took skill, and fire hazards were constant, so it was practical to centralize baking. Families prepared dough at home, then carried their shaped loaves wrapped in cloth or set in baskets to the bakehouse. Each loaf was marked with a small slash or symbol. This ensured that when dozens of loaves rolled out of the oven together, no one confused their supper with a neighbor's. The scene before you is lively. Villagers wait in line with their dough, children pulling at sleeves, dogs sniffing at the baskets. The bakehouse keeper, sometimes a woman, sometimes a man, works like a steady conductor, using a long wooden peel to slide loaves inside. Sparks jump as dough hits the hot surface. You hear the hiss, smell the crust forming, and suddenly realize you're surrounded by people united by the same desire: fresh, golden bread. Yet there's an interesting detail. Not all communal ovens were free to use. In many places, they were owned by lords or abbeys, and villagers paid a fee, sometimes money, sometimes part of the loaf. Imagine kneading bread while knowing a portion would be claimed before you tasted any. The oven was not only a place for food but also a tool of control and economy. Historians still debate whether this system brought communities together or created strain. The bakehouse could be a social center, full of conversation and shared news. But frustration likely grew when fees were steep or when the oven master favored certain families. You can imagine how many rumors began here, whispered between long pauses, as smoke drifted slowly upward. You kneel beside a basket and lift the cloth. The dough inside is rough, heavy with rye or barley, much darker than the soft wheat loaves reserved for the wealthy. Fine white flour was costly, usually eaten only by nobles or monasteries. For peasants, bread was dense, chewy, and sometimes gritty from coarse milling. Each bite held not only grain but also traces of the grindstone. Still, this bread was steady, filling, and far more sustaining than thin stews alone. The baking process feels almost ritualistic. Once the oven is heated, the fire is pulled out, leaving glowing embers. The floor is swept clean using a damp cloth wrapped on a pole or leafy branches. Then the dough is placed inside, the thick door is sealed, and time slows. Families wait outside with their baskets, exchanging stories. You hear laughter, complaints about taxes, talk of weather, and reminders of lingering debts. This isn't just baking. It's communal life. When the loaves finally emerge, the smell is extraordinary. Crusts crackle, releasing warm sweetness. Children cheer, adults relax, and for a moment the village feels lighter, uplifted by something as simple as bread. You imagine pulling off a piece while it's still too hot, burning your fingers but not minding, because this is warmth you can taste. One last note, stale bread was never wasted. Thick slices of yesterday's loaf. Bread became trenches, edible plates that absorbed stew and grease before being eaten or tossed to the dogs. It wasn't only food, it served as furniture, tableware, and sponge. No wonder medieval people valued it so deeply. As you step away from the bakehouse, the scent clings to your clothes, sweeter than smoke yet just as lasting. You realize the oven was more than a tool for baking. It was a source of community, keeping village life steady week after week. And as the crowd heads home with their loaves, you follow, already eager for the next story. You return to the manor hall, but this time your attention is drawn not to the hearth, but to the unusual device slowly turning before the flames. A long iron spit rotates, and skewered on it is a gleaming piece of meat. The slow, steady turning ensures it cooks evenly, juices falling into the pan with a hiss. Your stomach tightens at the smell, but then you notice something odd. The spit isn't turning by itself. Someone, or something, is powering it. One commonly accepted fact is that spit roasting was one of the most prestigious cooking methods in medieval times, especially among nobles. It required significant fuel, quality meat, and constant supervision, making it more a sign of wealth than a daily practice. But the spit was no magical device. It demanded labor, and that labor often fell on the lowest member of the household. Your eyes rest on a weary boy crouched near the fire, gripping the handle as he turns it again and again for hours. His cheeks burn from the heat, his eyes dull with boredom, but he cannot slow down. If he does, the Lord's meal may be ruined. These children were known as turnspit boys, and their work was repetitive, defined by endless rotations. It's a sobering scene, realizing the grandeur of a feast relied on a child's exhaustion. Historians still debate whether these boys were true servants, apprentices, or simply poor children hired cheaply and dismissed once they grew too tall for the space. Yet here comes the curious detail: not all spits were turned by children. In some homes, particularly later, special dogs were bred for the job. These turnspit dogs ran inside wooden wheels mounted beside the hearth, their paws powering the spit like small engines. The sight must have been both amusing and pitiful, panting animals driving the roast while guests laughed and celebrated nearby. Some accounts even claim the dogs were swapped out like machine parts, one replacing another when it tired. Imagine the chorus of barking in a smoky kitchen. The spit itself was a clever piece of engineering. Long iron rods, sometimes fitted with hooks, held entire carcasses. During large feasts, multiple spits might run at once, each turning a boar, goose, or rows of smaller birds. Fat dripped into pans below, not only to keep the fire controlled but to be reused in sauces. Nothing went to waste. The smell is powerful, rich, smoky, savory, with that familiar note of sizzling fat that makes you suddenly aware of your hunger. Standing close, you feel the heat like a wall. Your face prickles, your lips dry, and you begin to understand how difficult this work was. To sit here for hours, turning and sweating, sometimes punished if you slowed, this was the real cost of roasted luxury. By contrast, peasants rarely roasted meat. It required too much firewood, too much meat, and too much labor. Boiling or stewing was far easier and more efficient. This is why the spit roast became a symbol. Roasting meant you had resources. You lean in and catch the steady squeak of the turning spit, the groan of the wheel, the occasional pop as fat hits flame. It's hypnotic, almost soothing, yet the human cost is impossible to ignore. You glance at the boy again, his hands reddened by heat, and wonder if he dreams of a different life or if this task feels as natural to him as breathing. The guests in the hall see none of this. They will only see the roast arriving on its platter, glistening, carved neatly by a server. They'll admire the tenderness and taste without thinking of the child or the dog who made it happen. The spit conceals its labor in plain sight. Even hall architecture reflected the importance of roasting. Large fireplaces were built to hold multiple spits, and later, some castles installed mechanical turners powered by weights or even water wheels. But those developments came much later. For most of the Middle Ages, it was human or animal strength that kept the spit moving. You close your eyes and listen, the crackle of the fire, the squeak of the wheel, the soft drip of fat into pans. You picture the boy counting each turn or the dog running endlessly in its wheel. It becomes clear that every impressive feast depended not just on meat and fire but on these small, unseen figures working in the shadows. The roast continues spinning behind you, but tonight your attention shifts to the quieter pots simmering nearby. Because, impressive as spits and venison might be, most medieval meals weren't roasted. They were boiled, stewed, or slowly cooked until every ingredient melted into the broth. You crouch near a cauldron, watching steam curl upward, carrying the scent of barley, cabbage, and perhaps a stray bone if luck allowed. One accepted fact is that the staple dish of medieval Europe was pottage, a thick soup or stew that ranged from watery versions for peasants to richer ones with meat for nobles. The word became so linked to daily eating that English law even mentioned bread and pottage as basic rights in certain cases. You dip a wooden spoon into the bubbling mixture and realize this is the ancestor of many comfort foods today. And here's the quirky detail. Some households kept a perpetual stew, never emptying the pot completely, but adding fresh ingredients each day. The flavor grew deeper, a living recipe aging like wine, only with more onions. You can imagine someone boasting that their pot had simmered since winter. A strange claim, perhaps, but one that held real meaning. Who needs a family heirloom when you can taste tradition in every serving? Boiling offered practicality. Unlike roasting, which wasted fuel, boiling kept every bit of nutrition. Bones released their marrow. Grains softened. Herbs infused their aroma. You listen to the gentle bubbling, the soft hisses, and know you're hearing the heartbeat of survival. Slops or unexpectedly rich meals, accounts differ widely. Some descriptions mention generous handfuls of leeks, parsley, sage, and even a pinch of imported pepper. Others insist the poor often had little more than cabbage and barley to depend on. As you stir the pot, the truth seems to rest somewhere in between. Sometimes plain, sometimes flavorful, always shaped by whatever the market or garden offered that week. The cauldron beside you hangs from an iron hook, massive and rounded like a womb. Inside, peas soften into mash, carrots grow sweeter, and tiny scraps of bacon, if any are available, melt into a faint richness. Steam warms your face, earthy and familiar. Children dip hard bread into the stew to thicken it, turning a small portion into something more substantial. Behind you, women chat while chopping more leeks, and men sharpen knives as they wait for the pot to be served. Boiling also served a social purpose. A shared cauldron meant shared meals, and eating from the same pot strengthened community bonds. Picture 3 or 4 spoons dipping in together, slurping, laughing, arguing, everyone leaning in over the same half-filled vessel. Cleanliness wasn't the goal, closeness was. You can almost feel elbows brushing, broth splashing onto the floor, and the casual way people kept eating without concern. In wealthier kitchens, boiling became its own spectacle. Cooks created elaborate stews with wine, almonds, and rare spices, turning simple pottage into a display of skill. Almond milk often replaced dairy during Lenten fasting. Saffron tinted broth a golden hue, and meatballs shaped like pears or rabbits floated in elegant bowls. A nobleman enjoying stew was, in a way, consuming luxury. The contrast is stark. Peasants relied on cabbage stews to survive, while the elites savored almond stews for show. Yet both dishes shared the same name, pottage. The steady simmer becomes almost hypnotic, soothing, reminding you how forgiving this method was. Precision wasn't needed. The pot could sit for hours with only occasional stirring and still turn out edible. This freed women to spin wool, mend clothing, or tend children while dinner cooked on its own. The fire required care, but the pot rewarded patience. Sometimes stew liquid doubled as medicine. Herbal broths flavored with sage, thyme, or fennel were given for stomach issues. Warm milk boiled with breadcrumbs might calm a fever. Food and remedy often blurred, as though the cauldron served as both physician and pantry. You take another imaginary taste, spoons scraping the sides, thick and humble, yet deeply comforting. No theatrics, just warmth sliding down your throat, offering quiet strength. It's easy to see why this dish anchored medieval diets. Watching the bubbles rise and burst, you recognize something else. The steady pot was the heartbeat of medieval life. Always on the fire, always feeding, always there. Even now, the memory of its steam feels like a blanket over your shoulders. You drift from the bubbling pot toward a sharper scent, something stronger than cabbage and barley. It isn't fresh stew but the tang of salted meat and smoke lingering in a pantry. The kind of smell that signals food waiting months for its moment on the fire. Without refrigeration, people had to be inventive. Meat, fish, and even vegetables preserved through salt, smoke, and barrels of brine. Tonight, you step into one of those storerooms to see how survival depended on preservation. One clear fact: salt was the foundation of medieval food storage. Salt mines in regions like Salzburg or coastal salt pans were valued like gold because they kept food edible long beyond its natural limit. Without salt, winter meant starvation. When fresh harvests vanished, meat heavily crusted with salt hardened into something barely recognizable, yet soaking and boiling revived it. Entire economies formed around this mineral, and families guarded it like treasure. There's also an interesting detail: salted fish wasn't merely a fallback. It was a cultural staple. Huge barrels of salted herring traveled across Europe, feeding towns far from the shore. People spoke of the North Sea as if it were an endless pantry, supplying fish that could be packed into casks and traded for grain, wool, or spices. Picture a cart creaking into town, the barrels smell announcing their arrival before they come into view. For peasants, this was the flavor of Friday meals, of church fasting days, and of winter survival all at once. Yet scholars still debate how enjoyable these preserved foods were. Was salted beef a tough necessity endured without enthusiasm? Or did families come to appreciate its flavor, softening it with herbs? Some records note that wealthy households valued smoked hams and salted eels, even serving them at feasts. Others describe poorer communities complaining that winter meant endless salted meat and stale bread. Leaning against a wooden cask, you can almost sense both experiences: the comfort of having food at all, and the fatigue of eating the same tough piece day after day. You lift the lid of a barrel. Inside, pale slabs of pork rest in brine, slick and pressed down with heavy stones to keep them submerged. The sharp smell wrinkles your nose but brings reassurance. This barrel guarantees your family won't go hungry in February. Nearby, strings of smoked sausages hang from beams, their skins wrinkled and darkened by weeks of absorbing smoke. Anytime a hearth was lit, food could be hung above it, quietly turning into something durable. Preservation wasn't limited to meat. Your hand brushes sacks of beans and dried peas stored in wooden bins, sometimes dusted with ash or herbs to keep insects away. Without year-round fresh vegetables, dried legumes were lifelines, swelling into hearty stews when water and heat touched them. It's humbling how a single dried pea could mean the difference between hunger and comfort. Fruit also found places in storage. Apples were layered in straw in cool cellars to last for months. Grapes dried into raisins, figs pressed into dense cakes, and plums transformed into prunes. Each offered a burst of sweetness in the bleakness of winter. Imagine biting into a dried fig in January, chewy, sticky, tasting of summer long past, a small luxury that lifted spirits. A faint clink draws your attention to ceramic jugs sealed with wax. Inside them might be ale, cider, or pickled vegetables. Vinegar, produced through fermentation, became another preservative. Vegetables submerged in its sharp brine gained extended life, brightening otherwise plain meals. Pickles in earlier times weren't just decoration on a plate. They served as practical medicine, cutting through the heaviness of salted meat. Yet even with so many methods, nothing was completely reliable. Molds appeared, brine went bad, barrels cracked. Every household lived with constant risk, never fully sure if its supplies would last. Losing a single barrel meant facing hunger directly. So villagers learned constant caution, checking the brine, turning stored grains, smoking meat with care. Preservation wasn't a single task. It was an ongoing routine that demanded attention. Some of the techniques still feel surprisingly creative. In northern areas, fish were frozen directly into blocks of ice, using the same winters that threatened survival to help preserve food. In warmer places, sun-drying was common, with strips of fruit or fish left to dry under the heat. Across Europe, smokehouses stood firm, their chimneys releasing the steady aroma of meats slowly curing. Imagine stepping into one. The smell is thick, almost sweet, a scent of stored security that stays with you long after you leave. What captures your interest most is how these preserved foods shaped everyday cooking. Salted meat needed hours or even days of soaking before it could be eaten, which meant meals required forethought and patience. Dinner couldn't be decided at the last minute. Households lived according to preparation as much as hunger. Even the simple act of making pottage changed depending on which preserved items were available. You pause and picture the storeroom stillness. It's cool and dim, filled with the dull knock of barrels, the soft shift of straw, the slight creak of wood. This quiet space mattered as much as the noisy hearth, perhaps more. Without it, winter could easily overwhelm whole villages. The hearth cooked meals, but the pantry made sure food survived long enough to cook at all. There's a sense of appreciation here. Every salted fish, smoked ham, or jar of beans carried real weight. These weren't indulgences, they were stability. You can almost picture a mother pulling down a string of sausages on a harsh January evening, relieved that her children would eat. Stepping out of the pantry into daylight, the air seems different, cleaner, fresher compared to the briny scent inside. But you carry a deeper understanding. Preservation wasn't only about flavor. It was about stretching time, extending harvests, and carrying abundance into the lean months. If the fire was the home's heart, salt and smoke were its lungs, giving breath to food that might otherwise be lost. You can almost sense the villagers' quiet gratitude as they chewed preserved meat, spooned dried peas, or enjoyed the small sweetness of a shriveled prune. It wasn't extravagant, but it was enough, and in deep winter, enough could feel like a blessing. You leave the smoky pantry, letting your senses adjust, and head toward the sound of voices. Ahead lies the marketplace, the central hub of every medieval town. Even before you arrive, scents reach you: fried batter, sharp cheese, the salty smell of fish displayed on wooden boards. The market is a living cookbook, its stalls filled with the ingredients that later simmer in pots or roast by the fire. Today, you will move through this organized chaos and see what buying a meal meant centuries ago. Town records show that market days were carefully controlled. Local rulers or councils issued charters defining when and where markets operated, and merchants paid fees to sell their goods. These gatherings were not informal, they were essential parts of regional trade. Without them, people relied only on what they grew or raised. With them, foods from distant places became part of everyday eating. You move through the crowd and see baskets filled with root vegetables, turnips, onions, carrots, parsnips. Their earthy scent mixes with hay and animal odors. The colors are muted, nothing like modern displays, but each vegetable represents security, and families negotiate fiercely for them. Women bargain, children pull at clothing. Stall holders shout above the noise. A small scene catches your attention. A fish seller drops a live eel onto the counter, making nearby children shout in a mix of excitement and fear. Eels were widely eaten, fresh or salted, and seeing them sold alive was common. It's almost theatrical, the eel twisting as if trying to escape its fate. Displays like this drew buyers and entertained the crowd. Still, historians debate how fresh some fish truly were by the time they reached inland towns. Without fast transport, many arrived in poor condition. Some buyers likely noticed the smell but purchased anyway, hoping herbs and cooking would help. Others relied on salted barrels for safer options. Whether most people enjoyed good fish or endured mediocre ones remains an open question. You pause at a stall offering bundles of herbs: parsley, sage, rosemary, thyme. Their scents cut through the heavy atmosphere. Just a small sprig could brighten an otherwise plain pot of peas. Herbs weren't limited to wealthy homes. Even modest families could afford a little, and many grew their own. Nearby, baked goods are selling quickly. A woman offers warm pies filled with meat or spiced fruit, their crusts golden and inviting. These pies were the fast food of their time, portable, filling, and convenient for workers. One coin could buy a full meal, wrapped neatly in pastry. A curious exchange unfolds. A tanner trades leather scraps for onions, settling dinner through barter rather than money. In these markets, currency mattered, but trading goods directly was just as normal. Chickens for grain, wool for cheese, value shifted with needs, and food often served as a form of wealth. The market buzzes not just with trade but with conversation. People share news about taxes, rumors of conflict, and personal gossip. For villagers who lived far from others, this was the week's main social moment. Buying leeks and hearing the latest stories happen together, blending daily life with community. Nearby, a spice merchant carefully opens small cloth packets. Inside, pinches of pepper, cinnamon, and saffron glint in the sunlight. Their prices are high, sometimes more than meat, but even the poor might save for a small pinch on special occasions. You notice a housewife counting her coins before deciding to buy just enough to flavor a wedding stew. It's a moment that shows how taste could briefly cross class lines. You lean against a post, taking in the market symphony. Sellers shout, pigs squeal, boots thud on muddy ground. Flies buzz, children laugh, dogs bark. It's chaotic, yet alive, a rhythm of survival and community. You can almost taste the mingling aromas, the smoke of grilled meat, the sharpness of cheese, and the sweetness of fruit stacked in baskets. Bread sellers call out, lifting loaves of varying colors: white, brown, black. These hues reflected the flour used. White bread, sifted free of husk, was prized by the wealthy. Brown and black loaves, rich in bran, fed the poor. All were sold side by side, a daily reminder of class divisions visible, smelt, and tasted. You pause by a barrel of ale. Everyone drinks it, children, adults, workers, since water is often unsafe. The ale is weak but nourishing, offering calories and flavor. You sip it, sour, yeasty, yet refreshing after the dust and clamor. Markets weren't just about food, they were also sources of liquid sustenance. As the day progresses, stalls thin. Merchants pack unsold goods, sweeping vegetable scraps into piles, sometimes feeding them to nearby pigs. The ground is muddy, littered with straw, fish guts, and apple cores. You step carefully, imagining the intensified smell by evening. For townsfolk, this chaos is normal, even comforting. Mess signals abundance, silence signals scarcity. When you finally leave the marketplace, your arms metaphorically full, onions for stew, a loaf of brown bread, maybe a pinch of pepper, you carry the memory of smells, shouts, and energy. Medieval cooking didn't start at the hearth. It began here, amid the clamor of goods and voices. Without the market, there would be no stews, pies, or roasted meats, just gardens and monotony. The market added variety, even if sometimes accompanied by the smell of half-spoiled fish. As the street grows quieter, sounds fade. Yet echoes of coin clatter and fresh eel cries linger. Markets were about more than eating, they were about living, connecting, and surviving together. In this noisy exchange, medieval cooking took shape long before any pot was stirred. Stepping into a quieter corner, the air shifts, less fried batter, more damp earth and crushed green leaves. Here, the gardens that sustained medieval kitchens after market stalls closed flourish. Each cottage, no matter how small, had a patch of cultivated plants. These weren't ornamental gardens but practical collections of herbs, leeks, onions, and hardy greens resilient to neglect and frost. Monastic records and household accounts show these gardens were essential. Without them, meals would be bland grains. With them, even simple pottage could offer sharp onion, sweet leek, or a faint peppery note. You kneel, feeling the damp soil, the hidden backbone of medieval cuisine. A charming detail emerges. Many gardens doubled as medicine cabinets. Parsley was not only for broth, it freshened breath or eased stomach aches. Sage, thyme, and fennel served as both food and remedy. families planted them alongside crops, blurring the line between cooking and healing. A housewife could season lamb with mint while drying sprigs to treat winter coughs. Experts debate how varied these gardens were. Some claim peasant plots grew mostly onions, cabbages, and leeks, with diversity for wealthier households. Others point to evidence of herb patches including dill, chives, and even exotic plants introduced by monks. Likely, reality varied from village to village. You stand before a row of leeks. Their long green stalks resist cold and are versatile, chopped in stews, boiled, or wrapped in pastry for wealthier tables. Leeks appear in countless recipes, showing how simple ingredients could be repeatedly satisfying. Nearby, cabbages lie heavy, dirt-streaked. Ordinary to you, yet medieval cooks prized them, cheap, filling, and able to stretch soups. Bees hover over blossoms. Children nibble carrots, soil clinging to the roots. The garden is an ecosystem, quietly alive away from market clamor. Plant placement is deliberate. Tall herbs at the back, short greens at the front, ensuring nothing overshadows its neighbor. Even narrow paths allow only a single person to shuffle with a basket, efficiency over elegance. Marigolds bloom along edges, not purely decorative. Their petals added color to soups, mimicking saffron at low cost, a splash of beauty, a hint of deception. In wealthier homes and monasteries, gardens expanded into miniature farms. Monks cultivated onions, leeks, and herbs for medicinal syrups. They tracked thriving plants, shared cuttings with travelers, spreading flavors across Europe. Some monastery gardens even included exotic plants like coriander. Even early varieties of lettuce were considered luxuries compared to a peasant's humble cabbage. The soundscape here is calm, a contrast to the bustling market. You hear chickens scratching for worms, leaves rustling gently in the breeze, and the occasional plop as a gardener lifts a beetroot from the soil. You can almost taste the bright, lemony sharpness of fresh sorrel leaves. If the hearth represented smoky chaos, the garden is quiet abundance. Yet the garden was not without risk. Droughts, frosts, why failed, hunger followed swiftly. You imagine the worry on a mother's face as she inspects withered plants, knowing the winter pottage will be thinner. The fragility of survival is evident in the soil itself. Still, when gardens flourished, they were lifelines. Herbs turned plain grains into meals worth savoring. Greens provided essential vitamins, protecting against illness without anyone realizing it. Each plant offered a sense of control in an unpredictable world. You pick up a sprig of thyme, crush it, and inhale its sharp, earthy aroma. This scent defined medieval kitchens, fresh, resilient, and simple. As dusk falls, villagers tend their plots, pulling weeds, watering with buckets, and tying herbs into bundles to hang in rafters. Smoke from hearths blends with the garden's green scent, creating an aroma both homey and enduring. You glance at the rows of leeks and marigolds glowing in the fading light and realize these gardens were more than side projects. They were as vital as fire itself, shaping meals, health, community, and the rhythm of daily life. Leaving the village gardens behind, you follow a caravan road stretching to the horizon. The air shifts, carrying distant, exotic scents. Tonight, your journey explores medieval spices, the tiny flecks of color and aroma that transformed kitchens and economies alike. Today, a pinch of pepper is routine. In the Middle Ages, it was treasure, transported across deserts and oceans, guarded like jewels, and sprinkled on dishes as both flavor and status. Trade records confirm pepper as the most common imported spice, flowing steadily from India to Europe. Merchants measured it by the pound. In some cases, rent was even paid in peppercorns. Imagine a landlord accepting a sack of tiny black beads instead of coins. Those black dots in your modern grinder were once counted and fiercely protected. Medieval spice use could seem strange now. Cinnamon appeared in meat pies, ginger in fish sauces, and sugar, then considered a spice, was sprinkled on roasted meats. Sweet and savory combinations thrilled the palate. Picture a noble guest savoring venison sweetened with honey and cinnamon, flavors that might challenge a modern tongue. Historians debate whether ordinary villagers ever tasted these luxuries. Some suggest spices were confined to nobility and monasteries, while others think small amounts trickled into markets for special occasions. Likely, most peasants lived largely spice-free lives, with rare dishes hinting at foreign flavors. In a bustling town, you visit a spice merchant's stall. His table is modest in size but immense in value. Small wooden boxes hold pepper, ginger, cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, and saffron glowing like golden threads. Opened sparingly, their aromas fill the air. The merchant recounts caravans crossing deserts, camels trudging through storms, and ships braving tempests. Buying spices was buying adventure. Saffron captivates you. Its strands are almost weightless but cost more than gold by the ounce. Some merchants even dyed other plants yellow to mix in, making buyers squint to avoid fraud. Despite the risk, saffron's vivid color transformed dishes, creating soups and sauces that gleamed like liquid sunlight. Cloves and nutmeg came from distant islands, nearly mythical to Europeans. To taste them was to taste mystery. A noble might serve spiced wine as proof of wealth and sophistication, never considering the dangers faced by sailors to deliver these treasures. Sugar, too, was rare, cut into hard cones, shaved into chunks, and treated as medicine as much as seasoning. Blended with spices, it created sauces that were both sharp and sweet. You can almost feel the coarse texture between your teeth, far from the smooth crystals of modern packets. These spices transformed cooking. A simple beef stew became exotic with pepper, a custard turned regal with saffron, ale warmed with cloves became medicinal. Spices were not mere additions, they were transformations, kitchen alchemy. They also displayed social status. Wealthy hosts showcased spice collections at feasts, signaling wealth and taste. Guests marveled at colors, scents, and the subtle message, "I can afford this." In the market, scents mingle. Pepper tickles the nose, cinnamon is sweet and woody, ginger warm and fiery. These aromas cut through livestock and mud, creating pockets of magic. Tiny plants transported across continents carried immense power, yet the spice trade had its dangers. Wars, shipwrecks, plundered caravans. The desire for spices drove men forward, and tasting nutmeg meant tasting both flavor and blood. You realize medieval cooking was shaped not only by gardens and markets but also by global trade and risk. Every sprinkle of pepper carries a history of danger. As the merchant locks his boxes, you step away, still breathing in the enduring, unforgettable scents. Cinnamon clings lightly to your sleeve. You realize that medieval cooking was never purely local. Even in a smoky hall far from the sea, a simple pot of stew could carry the essence of Indian fields, Middle Eastern trade routes, or Mediterranean shores. Food was more than survival. It was a link to the wider, unpredictable world beyond the village gates. You breathe in the spice-scented air, letting the thoughts settle. In a monotonous world, spices offered both escape and expression. A pinch of pepper, a strand of saffron, a dusting of ginger, each could transform not only a meal but the cook's identity. You leave the gleaming jars of saffron and cinnamon behind and step into a different reality, clay bowls, coarse bread, and simmering pots untouched by exotic flavors. Tonight, you sit by the hearth of an ordinary peasant family, beginning to understand what cooking for the poor truly meant. No lavish feasts, no golden sauces, no decorative sugar, just the steady, repetitive work of making survival edible. Historical records show peasants largely relied on grains like barley, rye, and oats. These staples formed the core of their diet, while wheat was mostly a luxury for the elite. Bread was coarse, dark, sometimes gritty with bits of stone. It wasn't indulgent, it was fuel. Medieval cookbooks reveal the monotony of peasant meals. Day after day, families ate pottage, a thick soup of grains and vegetables, occasionally enriched with a small piece of meat if luck allowed. Many households maintained a single pot that simmered constantly, its contents changing with available scraps. Cabbage one day, leeks the next, sometimes enhanced with a flavoring bone. The taste was simple, earthy, even bland, yet it nourished, and that was sufficient. Experts debate just how meager these diets were. Some suggest they included vegetables, dairy, and fish, particularly during fasting periods. Others argue malnutrition and hunger were common in poor harvest years. Likely, the truth fluctuated with seasons and fortune. You glance around the modest cottage. Children nibble crusts of bread softened in ale, the safest available drink. A mother ladles pottage into wooden bowls, ensuring each child receives something substantial, not just thin broth. Her hands are rough, her face streaked with soot, yet her movements are precise and practiced. Dinner here is not a performance, it is endurance. Still, a hint of ingenuity emerges. On feast days, peasants might save a little honey to sweeten bread or add dried fruit to brighten a stew. Herbs from the garden could bring an otherwise plain pot to life. These were not luxuries, but small reminders that joy could exist within modest means. A small jug of thin, slightly sour milk sits in the corner. Dairy, curds, cheese, butter when available was common, though in small portions. Hard, salty cheese could last months and accompany bread as a meal itself. Meat was rare but present. Families might raise pigs or chickens, slaughtered only when necessary. More often, bones or scraps, bought cheaply or received as payment, flavored otherwise vegetarian meals. You watch a bone sizzle briefly in the pot, offering flavor but little meat. Everyone leans closer, hoping their ladle touched it. During famine years, loaves were sometimes stretched with acorns or beans. Dense and bitter, they were unappetizing but life-sustaining. Ale, weak and cloudy, nourished workers through long days, children included, as water was unsafe. Brewing was a household task, and the smell of fermenting grain was as familiar as smoke. The sounds here contrast sharply with noble halls. No musicians, no silverware clatter, just children slurping, fire crackling, wooden spoons creaking. Intimacy is forged through sharing from a single pot and surviving together. While nobles dazzled with sugar sculptures, peasants built strength from pottage and dark bread. It was not glamorous, but it was steady, possibly healthier, more vegetables, fewer heavy meats, balance born of necessity. Ironically, the poor may have lived longer on cabbage than the rich on venison. As the meal ends, bowls are scraped clean, bread crusts reabsorbed into broth, leftovers returned to the pot for tomorrow. The fire dies low, children grow drowsy, and the scent of barley and cabbage lingers. Humble, repetitive, even tiring, yet it is life. Outside, village sounds fade into the night, smoke rising from chimneys, faint dog barks, a baby's cry. Meals are small, but they carry survival and routine's quiet comfort. You leave the cottages behind and approach a castle's stone walls. Inside, the atmosphere shifts completely, loud, crowded, extravagant. Here, cooking is not only sustenance but spectacle, a display of power and status. Noble kitchens were massive, feeding hundreds with teams of cooks and assistants working in coordinated effort. Fires blazed across multiple hearths, cauldrons simmered side by side, spits turned continuously, roasting venison, swans, and other game. Food preparation resembled a military campaign more than a family meal. Records from English courts detail noble menus with dozens of dishes per course, highlighting the scale and ambition of these feasts. Than a person, these were not just meals, they were edible performances. You can almost see a pie bursting open as doves flutter out, musicians striking up, and guests gasping in delight. Often, cooks added a flourish by dyeing foods with vibrant colors, red with sandalwood, green with parsley, gold with saffron. A custard could glow like sunlight, a sauce shimmer emerald. To a medieval noble, a meal that did not look spectacular was hardly worth serving. You can imagine guests whispering as each dish arrives, a parade of colors more dazzling than the hall's tapestries. Yet historians debate whether nobles truly savored these elaborate flavors. Some argue that spice-heavy, sugar-laden dishes were symbols of wealth rather than taste. Others believe that nobles developed palates for unusual blends, craving cinnamon in meat pies and ginger in fish stews. Watching a lord bite into gilded meat, it's difficult to know whether he enjoys the flavor or the attention it brings. The kitchens themselves were overwhelming. Vaulted rooms filled with smoke and heat, servants shouting, water hissing on hot pans, dogs scurrying for scraps. The noise of chopping, pounding, and clanging was deafening. In one corner, almonds were ground for almond milk, a versatile staple used in both fasting days and rich sauces. In another, sugar was boiled and shaped into castles or animals, hardened into edible spectacles that amused diners before they even took a bite. The air smelled of roasting meats, sweet syrups, spice sauces, and fresh bread, so thick it was almost intoxicating. Sweat beads at your temples, yet there is excitement. This is more than cooking. It is alchemy, turning flour, meat, and imported spices into prestige. Noble feasts often carried symbolic meaning. A roasted boar's head might represent strength, a tower of jellies wealth and mastery over nature. Even the arrangement of dishes was deliberate, designed to impress visiting dignitaries. While nobles dined above, servants ate below. Their meals were simpler, yet far richer than the scraps available to peasants. Outside the castle walls, peasants might eat cabbage broth, while lords feasted on delicacies beyond the common imagination. You can hear the hall above, laughter, clinking goblets, musicians shuffle. Swan roasts glisten under candlelight, sugar sculptures shine like jewels, and guests whisper about who receives the choicest portions. The feast is politics as much as pleasure. But what strikes most is its fleeting nature, hours of labor, fortune spent on spices and sugar, all consumed in a single evening, leaving only crumbs, grease stains, and full bellies. The grandeur remains only in memory, gossip, and the smoky rafters. Tomorrow, the cycle begins again. Outside, the castle glows as peasants eat to survive, and nobles eat to display. One pot of cabbage preserves life, one pie of gilded meat preserves reputation. Between these extremes lies the essence of medieval cooking, a spectrum from survival to spectacle, where each meal carried meaning beyond taste. The church also shaped what people ate. Standing in a kitchen on a Friday, the church calendar dictates the menu. Ecclesiastical rules required abstinence from meat on certain days, especially Fridays, Lent, and Saints' Vigils. Fish took center stage, appearing salted, fresh, or shaped into pies that resembled meat. Fasts inspired creativity. Almonds became mock eggs, fish disguised as fowl, vegetables carved into playful forms. Guests might bite into a roast chicken, only to find seasoned fish, laughter replacing disappointment. Scholars debate the strictness of these rules. Peasants, whose diets were mostly vegetables and grains, may have noticed little difference, while parish court records show fines for those breaking fasts. Wealthy nobles used fasting as another stage for extravagance, serving elaborate fish banquets instead of simple abstinence. Festivals, on the other hand, brought color, sound, and abundance, roasted geese, sugar confections, fresh bread, and ale. Villages joined in community feasts after harvest, celebrating with pigs, bread, and cider. The rhythm of fasting and feasting defined medieval eating. By the hearth, fish sizzles on the griddle, herbs lifted into the air, parsley, dill, transforming the ordinary into divine. A pot of almond milk simmers, showing that even fast-day food could be luxurious. The hiss of fish, crackle of firewood, and distant chants of monks blend into ritual. Meals nourish body and soul. Children tug at skirts for their bowls of bread and sustenance, completing the scene of daily life intertwined with faith, festivity, and flavor. The bread is sliced, ale poured, and families bow their heads before eating. The meal may be modest, yet the moment feels sacred. Eating is more than survival. It's a practice intertwined with faith, governed by rules that touch every bite. Festivals, however, are louder, more exuberant. The aroma of roasted goose mingles with spiced wine, the sound of fiddles and drums fills the air, and bodies press together in celebration. For a few days, hunger and restraint are forgotten, replaced by abundance and laughter. Tables overflow with platters, hands reach eagerly, and the night stretches long with dancing. Palpable. Even in scarcity, people found ways to feast. Looking back, the church calendar shaped not only what people ate, but how they thought about food. Periods of abstinence taught humility, feasts inspired gratitude. This rhythm prevented life from becoming monotonous. The year itself felt seasoned with sacred patterns, each fast and festival a spice in daily life. When bells ring again, meals conclude, plates cleared, scraps offered to the poor, and fires banked low. Outside, stars prick the night sky. You leave carrying the scent of fish and herbs, the memory of laughter, and the hush of bowed heads. In medieval times, food was more than nourishment. It was sanctified, restricted, celebrated, bound to belief as much as hunger. The church bells fade, and your attention turns to the riverbanks, where fishing boats drift gently. Fish played a far greater role in medieval cooking than we might assume, largely due to fasting rules. Without refrigeration, keeping fish fresh was a constant challenge. Tonight, you crouch by baskets of slippery eels and barrels of salted herring, witnessing the ingenuity required to keep seafood on the table. Trade records show inland towns relied heavily on preserved fish. Rivers and lakes provided some fresh catches, but most fish traveled long distances packed in salt. The herring trade was enormous, so vast that some historians liken it to the medieval oil industry. Ships carried barrels across the North Sea and Baltic, unloading them in ports for carts to transport inland. By the time the herring reached small villages, it was nearly as much salt as fish, yet invaluable. Elaborate fish ponds on estates and in monasteries were another strategy. Nobles and monks dug artificial ponds to keep carp, tench, and pike alive year-round, ensuring a steady supply for fast days. Picture a monk scattering crumbs across a pond as fish wriggle to the surface. A practical and serene ritual, a garden of water serving both kitchen and soul. Scholars debate how palatable preserved fish really was. Salted or dried cod and herring could be tough and unappetizing without careful preparation, yet boiling, stewing with herbs, or soaking often restored flavor. You peer into a peasant's pot of salted herring bubbling in ale, parsley floating on top, and can almost believe it tasted better than expected. At the fishmongers' tables, fresh eels coil in wicker baskets, their slick bodies catching the morning sun. Delicacies in some regions, cheap in others, they are versatile, fried, stewed, or baked into pies. The riverbank hums with life, gulls cry overhead, the water laps softly, children squeal as they poke at wriggling fish. In coastal towns, markets brim with oysters, mussels, and shellfish, sold by the bucket. These were inexpensive protein for the poor, yet also prized by wealthier tables, often prepared with spices or wine. The smell is briny and sharp. Without ice, fish had to move swiftly from water to pan or risk spoiling. Servants rushed through streets, baskets bouncing, flies swarming, cooks ready with boiling pots. Timing was everything. Sturgeon, known as the royal fish, had its own twist. In England, it belonged to the crown. Catching one brought both honor and frustration. Fishermen handed it to officials while their own stomachs went hungry. As evening falls, you sit beside a fire with fish cooking. A cauldron simmers with salted cod, softened after hours of soaking, its broth enriched with leeks and herbs. On a griddle, eels sizzle, skin crisping, fat popping and hissing. Villagers huddle close, bread in hand, waiting for the fish to be served. On fast days, this is not merely food, it is obedience. Fish carried meaning beyond sustenance. It was religious, social, and economic. Herring barrels shaped trade, monastery ponds shaped landscapes, and the smell of fish shaped memory. Medieval life without fish would have been unthinkable. Stepping back from the riverbank, your clothes faintly smell of brine and smoke. Gulls wheel overhead, the splash of oars dips into water, and fishmongers' chatter fades. Fish was woven into every fast, every market, every meal, sometimes tough, sometimes delicious, always essential. You leave the river and enter a dim tavern, where clattering mugs and the aroma of brewing grains greet you. If fish was the body of meals, drink was the bloodstream. Water was risky, often contaminated, so ale, cider, and weak wine became daily staples, consumed by all ages. Tonight, you cradle a mug, tasting what kept medieval people hydrated and alive. Records consistently note ale as the universal drink of the common folk, not the strong hoppy Irish of today, but weak, lightly fermented brews, cloudy and sour, just enough to sustain. Ale killed harmful bacteria, though not enough to make anyone drunk. Children drank it freely, laborers quenched thirst in the fields, and households brewed it constantly. The smell of malted grain was as familiar as wood smoke. One notable custom was that brewing often fell to women. Housewives soaked barley, stirred mash, tended bubbling pots, and strained the liquid into jugs, sometimes adding herbs for flavor. Long before hops became common, some women brewed enough to sell. These alewives advertised with a broom or branch above their doors. Inside their cottages, you would find steaming tubs, sticky floors, and the warm yeasty aroma of fermenting grain. For some, brewing was a livelihood. For others, it ensured the family had a safe drink. Scholars debate how nutritious ale really was. Some argue it offered essential calories and vitamins, almost like liquid bread. Others say it was too weak to be nutritionally significant, serving mainly as a safer alternative to water. Drinking it, you feel the thin liquid fill your stomach without satisfying hunger, yet it warms you enough to endure another day of labor. Cider added variety, especially in apple-growing regions. Presses groaned as apples were crushed, the juice flowing into barrels to ferment naturally. The drink was tart, crisp, and sometimes sweet depending on the harvest. It was not luxurious but refreshing, a countryside staple that flavored festivals and daily life alike. Imagine a harvest celebration where villagers pass around wooden mugs of cider, laughter louder than the drink itself. One, in contrast, was mostly for the wealthy. Imported from southern Europe, it was costly, though local vineyards supplied monasteries and noble estates. In noble halls, wine might be spiced with cinnamon or clove and served warm in golden goblets. To sip it was to taste both grapes and prestige. Peasants rarely saw wine, though weak local versions occasionally reached markets, or they encountered it during Mass when priests lifted chalices. Tavern customs sometimes surprise. In some places, patrons paid not per mug but per time spent drinking, a measure of endurance rather than thirst. Imagine a landlord saying, "For this penny, drink until the candle burns out." People sipped frantically, hoping to get their money's worth before the wax melted. Taverns were lively, mugs clinking, laughter echoing, stools scraping, voices humming, and the air thick with yeast, sweat, and wood smoke. Ale was sour and earthy, not immediately pleasant, but familiarity turned it comforting. It became a lifeline for many. Ale was more than comfort, it was essential. Laborers needed hydration during long hours in the fields, and ale provided it safely. It allowed grains to be consumed in liquid form, stretching harvests further. Even children instinctively understood its value. Yet, stronger drinks existed, especially for feasts, and drunkenness was common, prompting sermons and laws. Alehouses could become rowdy or violent, with scuffles spilling into the street and the taste of sour ale lingering on everyone's breath. In monasteries, brewing reached new heights. Monks perfected recipes, recorded precise proportions, and brewed for charity as well as personal use. Their alesh were stronger and richer, some precursors to modern beers. Picture a monk raising a mug after Vespers, savoring a drink crafted with devotion and skill. As night falls, you sit in the tavern. Benches creak under tired bodies, candles sputter, and the last mugs are drained. Medieval life depended on these drinks, they were infrastructure as vital as the hearth or plow. Stepping outside, the cool night air carries the smell of yeast, and the warmth of ale lingers in your belly. Stars gleam overhead, and the village quiets. Every sip of ale, cider, or weak wine represents both survival and occasional celebration. Back in a village cottage, the scene shifts. The story focuses on those who labored over the hearth. Cooking was primarily a woman's task, recorded consistently in household and memorial records. From dawn to night, women tended fires, fetched water, ground grain, and stirred stews. Unlike noble kitchens staffed with professional male cooks, ordinary households were women's domain. You watch a mother kneel on the hard floor, one hand gripping a soot-blackened spoon, the other cradling a fussing baby. Dinner, childcare, and survival happened simultaneously. The work was dangerous. Open fires, suspended pots, and bubbling cauldrons led to burns. Women were frequently scarred by steam, boiling water, or flames, yet they persisted because hunger allowed no pause. Historians debate the autonomy women had in their kitchens. Some argue they had authority over household management and cooking techniques. Others emphasize constraints, noting women cooked only with available ingredients. Observing a mother ladle thin pottage, both truths emerge. She masters her tools but cannot conjure food from nothing. Medieval humor also survives in poems and plays, often poking fun at alewives and housewives, burned stews, watered ale, or scolding wives. These jokes highlight the central role of women in households, whose work kept families alive. Around the cottage, their presence is evident. Herbs drying from rafters, linen used as strainers, a young girl grinding barley with raw hands. Cooking was never solitary. It was shared labor, essential to survival. For the women who lived it, life at the hearth was probably monotonous. Yet, in that repetition lay a quiet dignity, each stir, each grind, each slice, keeping the family tethered to survival. The strain is visible in the cook's body, her back bent, fingers cracked, hair streaked with soot, but so is her resilience. She improvises constantly. Missing onions? Bleak step in stale bread? She softens it in broth. Medieval cooking was less about following recipes and more about resourcefulness, a constant game of substitution. Watching her, it becomes clear why so many traditional dishes celebrate thrift. Another fascinating detail, women's work in the kitchen gave them knowledge beyond food. The same hands that stirred stews brewed herbal teas for fevers, poultices for burns, and tonics for childbirth. The kitchen was part pantry, part pharmacy. You can imagine her leaning over a pot, this time not with cabbage but with sage and honey, quietly telling her child it will ease a cough. During famine, the pressure intensified. Mothers stretched meals, boiling bread into soup, grinding weeds into flour, often going hungry themselves so their children could eat. Chroniclers note women fainting in fields from hunger after giving up their portions. You picture her slipping a spoonful into her child's bowl instead of her own, smiling faintly as if hunger were a stranger. Yet even amid hardship, moments of joy appeared. On feast days, the same hands that stirred cabbage stew-shaped dough into pastries, baked pies with herbs and cheese, or drizzled honey over fritters. Then, the kitchen became more than work. It became celebration, love, even art. As the fire dims, she wipes her brow. Her family gathers around, bowls in hand. She ladles the stew, serving everyone, reserving the smallest portion for herself. No one thanks her aloud. The gratitude is silent, found in full bellies and quiet nights. But it is there. Without her, there would be no meal, no hearth, no survival. Stepping into the cool night, smoke and herbs cling to your clothes. You realize medieval cooking wasn't just about ingredients or tools. It was about the women bent over fires, enduring burns and exhaustion to turn scraps into sustenance. Their names may be forgotten, but their labor lives on in every bite of bread, every sip of broth, every life carried into the next dawn. The scene shifts. You leave the cottage, smoke still clinging to your clothes, and enter the echoing hall of a town guild house. Here, the atmosphere is different. Long tables stretch into shadows. Heavy tapestries hang on the walls. The smell is richer, spicier, deliberate. Tonight, you witness another facet of medieval cooking, professional guild cooks, who fed not families but institutions hosting civic banquets, where food became a statement of power and order. Records show that guilds, whether merchants, weavers, or goldsmiths, held feasts for anniversaries, elections, or to honor patrons. These occasions demanded scale and precision, so professional cooks, trained in managing large kitchens, were hired. Unlike village women, these cooks were artisans, their names recorded alongside tailors and masons as respected craftsmen. The guild feast was their stage. One remarkable detail, these meals could be highly regulated. In some cities, ordinances specified exactly how much each guest received: ounces of beef, loaves of bread, jugs of ale. Cooks became logisticians, balancing fairness with spectacle. Imagine standing in a smoky hall, hearing knives measure portions precisely, realizing food here is both pleasure and contract. And then there were the extravagances. Guild cooks crafted showpieces, jellies shaped like heraldic beasts, pies adorned with intricate pastry crests, even fountains of wine. These were not everyday meals but edible emblems of civic pride. You can picture weary cloth merchants cheering as a lion-shaped pastry arrives, part dessert, part mascot. Scholars still debate whether these recipes reflected ordinary taste or were spectacular displays saved for special occasions. Likely, the cook's everyday skills were elevated into performances, art and advertisement intertwined. The kitchen is a frenzy. Cauldrons bubble with beef and mutton stews, thick with onions and barley. Fires roar under spits turning geese and rabbits. Apprentices rush back and forth, fetching water, chopping herbs, wiping sweat. The head cook barks orders, cutting through the noise like a ship's captain. The air is rich with roasting meat, the sweetness of almond sauces, the spice of ginger and pepper. Sugar is treated as a sculptural medium, not just a sweetener. Candied almonds piled in gleaming mountains, sugar paste molded into towers and castles, glazed to shine in candlelight. To consume sugar in such quantity is to consume wealth itself. Guild members gather, anticipation rising. Bowls of pottage arrive first, thick and hearty. Then come platters of roasted meats, golden pies, and jugs of ale. Eating is more than sustenance. It is solidarity, a performance of belonging. Politics is present too. Seats follow rank. The best cuts go to the highest standing. Carvers present choicest morsels to guild masters while others receive legs or wings. Every bite speaks of hierarchy. Food is language. Not all feasts ended peacefully. Records mention drunken brawls, disputes over portions, and lawsuits against cooks accused of cheating. You can imagine a hall that began with music ending in spilled ale, broken benches, and a cook dragged before magistrates. Food brought people together, yet it also tested patience and pride. Still, the spectacle mattered. A guild that could host an extravagant feast displayed its success to the town. Merchants who dined at these events carried the memory into their dealings, reinforcing loyalty. Here, cooking was both craft and statement. Every roast goose added to the guild's civic prestige. As the feast concludes, the hall hums with fading laughter, shuffling feet, and the clinking of empty jugs. Servants gather leftovers, dogs scurry for bones, and the fire burns low. The lingering scent of spiced wine and roasted meat reminds you that the guild cook's work went beyond feeding stomachs. He nurtured identity, fostered fellowship, and staged power through a meal. Stepping outside, the faint music from the hall still drifts into the night. Stars glimmer above, cool against the smoky warmth on your skin. You sense that medieval cooking wasn't only about hunger, it was about belonging, order, spectacle, and pride. Leaving the guild hall, with echoes of laughter and spilled ale behind, you head toward the town square. The air shifts, sharper, greasier, alive with the aroma of hot food prepared openly. This is street food, not a noble feast or a home-cooked stew. It calls from crowded alleys and smoky stalls. Tonight, you find yourself among vendors selling pies, pancakes, and skewered meats, seeing how townspeople ate on the go. Records from London, Paris, and other busy cities show cooked food was widely available on streets. Travelers, laborers, and apprentices without kitchens depended on vendors. Bakers sold pies filled with pork, beef, or fish. Cooks fried pancakes in animal fat. Brewers offered mugs of hot ale, spiced with ginger or honey. Long before fast food was a concept, convenience was everywhere. In some cities, authorities regulated street food. Concerned about spoiled meat or fraud, officials required cooks to display their goods openly. Imagine walking a medieval street, seeing pies cut open on counters to reveal their steaming fillings, proof of freshness. Transparency wasn't courtesy, it was survival. Historians debate who ate most street food. Some suggest the urban poor relied on it. Others argue that wealthier townsfolk bought pastries and pancakes as treats. Observing the square, both seem true. Apprentices devour pies before returning to work, while merchants sip spiced wine and chat leisurely. The reality bridged both worlds. The scene is chaotic, noisy, irresistible. A cook flips thin pancakes on a hot pan, the sizzle filling the air with buttery scent. Children gather for scraps. Nearby, A woman ladles hot pea soup into wooden bowls, steam rising in clouds. Herbs, onions, and smoke mingle, creating a rich, intoxicating aroma. An unusual delicacy catches your eye: pies shaped like coffins. Not for the dead, but referring to the thick pastry shell encasing meat or fish. Often nearly inedible, these crusts served as containers for rich, savory fillings. A vendor opens one, releasing steam as customers lean forward to dip bread in the gravy. Street cries rise as hawkers call their wares in sing-song chants: hot pies, fresh pies, blending with horse hooves and chatter. The rhythm of commerce becomes music, each call a form of medieval advertising. Not all street food was hot. Sellers offered cheese, fruit, or nuts in small bags. Summer brought strawberries or cherries, bright against the city grime. A sweet bite could brighten a dreary day, just as a pie satisfied hunger. Watching the crowd, you see workers with grime-streaked hands clutching bowls of broth, students debating philosophy over pancakes, and beggars hoping for scraps. The street is a dining hall without walls, a melting pot of classes sharing space, if not equal portions. Evening sounds intensify, laughter bursts, mugs clatter, dogs bark, and the smells of meat, onions, and frying batter dominate. Eating here is immediate, tactile, messy, and joyful. Risks exist: hygiene was poor, stomach ailments common, and enforcement of standards inconsistent. Still, hunger and the thrill of the crowd made it worth the gamble. Street food shaped tastes beyond necessity. Alley dishes often migrated to noble kitchens, refined into courtly recipes. A fried fritter might inspire a dessert, a pie filling might appear in banquets. Street cuisine nourished both body and imagination. As the market quiets, vendors pack up, scrape pans, and douse fires. The grease lingers, mingled with smoke and faint sweetness. Townspeople drift home, hunger-sated, but the memory of sizzling pies and steaming pastries lingers, a reminder that medieval food wasn't only about hearths or halls. It was immediate, noisy, fragrant, a small miracle sold for a coin on cold nights. Leaving the square, the scent of fried pies and ale fades, replaced by dust, horse sweat, and the creak of wooden carts. Here, food takes on a new challenge: cooking on the road. Pilgrims, soldiers, and merchants could not carry kitchens, yet all needed sustenance. Tonight, you settle beside a campfire, ready to witness how food sustained life beyond cottages and castles. Feeling the chill of open fields and the challenge of cooking while traveling is something medieval travelers knew well. Chronicles and military accounts make it clear: food on the road was simple, practical, and designed for endurance. Pilgrims carried bread, cheese, and dried fish in their packs. Soldiers relied on hard biscuits, salted pork, or oats. Merchants might bring a servant skilled at making a stew from whatever the journey provided. There were no shared bakehouses, no guild cooks, just fire, pots, and what could be gathered or bought from villages along the way. Records frequently note that travelers depended on pottage even while on the move. Small iron pots were valued possessions, hung from carts or carried on pack animals. At night, campfires dotted the roadsides, each with a pot simmering. Grains boiled in water or ale, with scraps of meat added when available, and herbs plucked from hedges for flavor. Picture dozens of flickering fires in the darkness, each a lifeline for a tired traveler. A curious detail appears in military accounts. Soldiers sometimes boiled leather or chewed belts when rations ran out, softening them in water to make them barely edible. It sounds grim, but desperate measures were part of survival. More often, they foraged, catching rabbits, gathering nuts, or digging roots. Cooking on the road was a mix of planning and improvisation. Experts debate how well-fed medieval armies truly were. Some argue logistics kept them supplied with salted meat and bread carts. Others suggest hunger was constant, with soldiers often undernourished. Sitting by a fire, one could experience both realities. A steaming pot ready to eat, another nearly empty but still shared among comrades. The truth varied with circumstance. Listening closely, the sounds of road cooking emerge: the crackle of twigs feeding flames, knives striking wooden bowls, travelers exchanging stories while waiting for stew to thicken. Horses stamp nearby, wind whispers through hedges, and distant church bells mark a town the travelers won't reach tonight. Food on the road was never quiet or solitary, it moved with the sounds of the journey. Bread was a staple. Dense loaves could last for days, though they hardened quickly. Slices were softened by dunking into broth or ale. Hard cheese was essential, tightly wrapped and eaten in small pieces. Imagine a pilgrim breaking a hunk of cheese and sharing it by the fire with a stranger. These simple exchanges turned the road into a place of fellowship. Occasionally, roadside taverns offered treats like pancakes, quickly fried in shallow pans for a coin. Unlike bustling town street food, these were quiet affairs. An innkeeper's wife flipping batter on the hearth, handing warm cakes to travelers who ate and moved on. The smell, slightly sweet, comforting, must have been irresistible after days of stale bread. Cooking on the road also had rituals. Pilgrims often carried scallop shells, both as devotional badges and makeshift bowls or spoons. Imagine sipping broth from a shell beneath the stars, where the sacred and practical blurred in a simple gesture. Military camps had their own notes. Large cauldrons fed entire companies, stews made from whatever could be obtained, bones, barley, cabbage, turnip tops, bubbling into communal meals. Soldiers complained about monotony, yet the rhythm of ladling stew for hundreds created cohesion. Food, however plain, became a form of discipline. The road was dangerous. Fires had to be lit quickly and guarded to avoid bandits or enemies. Meals were sometimes skipped for stealth, or a sudden raid could overturn pots, waste food, and leave soldiers hungry until the next village. Cooking on the move was never certain. It was a fragile hope amid uncertainty. Sitting by the fire, one could smell oats thickening, hear fat hiss into flames, and feel heat against the palms. The stew might be plain, but it was hot, and that was what mattered. After miles of cold marching, bread dipped into the pot was savored, offering warmth and comfort. Voices faded, travelers curled under cloaks, and the fire continued to crackle. At dawn, pots were scraped clean, fires extinguished, and the road called again. Cooking on the move was fleeting, yet its comfort lingered, brief but vital. Stepping off the roadside into a medieval ship, the hearth disappears, replaced by rolling waves. On board, cooking must be reimagined. The cramped galley relied on salted beef and hard biscuits, with every meal a battle against hunger and the sea. Maritime records show that sailor diets were harsh: salted meat, barreled or brined fish, and ship's biscuit, dense bread baked hard for months of storage. Sailors often soaked biscuits in broth or ale before chewing, sometimes removing weevils from crumbs. Fresh water was scarce, so cooking water was frequently reused. Pots boiled meat repeatedly, thickening the brine into a strong, salty, sometimes unpleasant liquid. Necessity demanded endurance. Experts remain divided on the nutritional value of ship diets. Some argue salted meats and biscuits supplied enough calories and strength. Others cite scurvy and malnutrition as evidence that preserved foods left sailors weakened over time. One can imagine both scenarios: men singing as they eat biscuit, or swollen gums and aching joints marking each bite. The galley itself was tiny, fires dangerous at sea, and every meal required care. The challenge of cooking on the move, whether on road or ship, was constant. Yet in every pot, every simmering stew or soaked biscuit, there was comfort, discipline, and a reminder that even in harsh conditions, food sustained body and spirit. Cooking at sea happened in iron boxes filled with sand, with flames carefully controlled. Smoke hung low, pressed by the wind. The air carried the heavy scent of boiled beef, damp wood, wet rope, and always endless salt. A cook stirred a pot, bracing against the ship's sway, each movement a negotiation with the restless sea. Another striking detail was the use of ale or wine instead of water. Barrels of liquid took up valuable space, but they were safer than stagnant water. Sailors drank weak ale daily, just enough to quench thirst, reserving stronger spirits like brandy for storms or celebrations, warming frozen bodies. You can imagine mugs passed around after a safe landfall, ale tasting sweeter than gold in that moment. Small luxuries occasionally appeared: cheese, onions, dried beans, offering brief relief from monotony. Sailors caught fish when they could, hauling them from nets over the side, scales gleaming in sunlight. A sudden catch meant a feast, the galley alive with sizzling fat and laughter louder than the waves. For one night, the sea seemed generous. Yet most days remained monotonous: biscuit, salted meat, a ladle of broth. The rhythm of meals mirrored the steady motion of the waves. Wooden bowls clattered, mugs met teeth, and muttered complaints punctuated the hum of routine, along with the occasional joke at the cook's expense. Food bound the crew, not through joy, but through shared endurance. Rank mattered even here. Officers sometimes ate better, with spiced or sugared meals. Sailors glanced enviously at captains enjoying softer bread or fresher meat. Even at sea, hierarchies sat at the table. The sounds of the ship sharpened around you, rigging creaking, sails slapping, waves crashing. Below deck, spoons scraped bowls, mugs clinked against teeth, a sailor hummed to mask the endless saltiness. The brine clung to clothes, skin, and food, relentless. Rations often spoiled, meat turned rancid, biscuit molded. Sailors trimmed the worst, held their noses, and ate anyway. Hunger left little choice. Diaries recount maggoty biscuits eaten in the dark to avoid seeing the infestation. The thought shudders the mind, yet also highlights the stubborn endurance required to survive. Even amid bleakness, camaraderie grew. Meals on deck brought shared hardship. Grim bites were punctuated by laughter, songs, and stories, breaking the monotony of the sea, however briefly. A thin, salty stew still gathered men together. As you step back onto the deck, wind on your face and the horizon stretching endlessly, the ship rocks and sails groan. The memory of biscuit and broth lingers. Cooking at sea wasn't about pleasure, it was survival. Every chew of tough biscuit or sip of briny stew carried sailors forward, toward unknown ports, battles, home. Food was the fragile thread between despair and determination, stretched taut but unbroken. The salty tang clings even as you step ashore, yet your path leads not to cozy kitchens, but to the darker realities of medieval cooking. Hazards lurked wherever fire, boiling water, and iron tools gathered. In an age before fireproof bricks, oven mitts, or safety protocols, cooking was perilous labor, leaving scars on bodies and memories. Household accounts and court records make this clear. Fire was constant. Open hearths sent sparks flying, thatched roofs caught embers, and entire rows of houses sometimes burned. Imagine a stray spark igniting stored straw during supper. Flames raced faster than buckets could douse them, turning a meal into catastrophe in moments. Historical records confirm that medieval rulers used feasts strategically. A king's meal wasn't just about hunger, it was about impressing visiting nobles, foreign ambassadors, and binding vassals through shared abundance. Dining became a stage for negotiation, where the absence of a dish or a guest's seating spoke louder than words. The scale of these events was staggering. Coronations and weddings saw hundreds of dishes prepared, oxen roasted whole, wine flowing in fountains, custards and pies arranged in glittering rows. Candlelight lit the hall, smoke curled in the rafters, and the air was dense with roasted meat, spices, and perfume. Voices clashed, goblets clinked. This was less a supper than a symphony of status. A fascinating detail: subtleties, dishes disguised as castles, saints, or heraldic beasts. Pies could conceal birds that flew out when cut. Sugar paste sculpted knights or angels, brightly colored. Guests gasped, applauded, whispered. Edible theater impressed and intimidated. Imagine the ripple of awe as a roasted peacock, feathers reattached and gilded with gold leaf, is served. Historians debate whether such creations were eaten or just admired. Either way, the message was clear: wealth and power could be made visible on a plate. The kitchen beneath this spectacle was a storm. Spits rotated with venison, boar, and fowl. Cauldrons boiled fish stews for those observing fasting rules. Ovens baked sugar-spiced custards. Cooks shouted orders. Apprentices ran with trays, dogs scavenged scraps. Heat and noise were relentless, scents intoxicating: roasted meat, saffron, honeyed pastries. Even place settings were symbolic. Nobles received fine white bread, while lesser guests had darker loaves. Proximity to the high table determined the quality of food and drink. A knight with plain mutton might envy a lord dining on gilded swan. Dishes arrived in processions, trumpets blared, servants carried platters, and each course was announced like a proclamation. First came stews thick with almonds, setting the tone for a meal where power and prestige were served as prominently as the food itself. Then came pies filled with venison and prunes, followed by roasted cranes and peacocks, and finally sweets and delicate treats. Wine flowed freely. Goblets clinked. Laughter rose. The hall transformed into a stage where the performance was the food itself. Yet beneath the spectacle, politics quietly simmered. At one end of the table, an envoy sampled cautiously, aware that poison could be present. At another, two nobles whispered over their plates, negotiating land or marriage. Every bite carried significance. Here, food was never neutral. It was weapon, bribe, promise, and threat all at once. A unique detail emerges from descriptions of mess dining, where small groups of 4 or 6 shared a platter. Each group had to divide portions fairly, fostering both camaraderie and tension. Imagine sharing a roasted goose with 3 others, each eyeing the choicest piece, testing trust and manners. It was a miniature political arena played out on a plate. The soundscape was overwhelming. Minstrels played lutes and drums. Servants shouted commands. Guests laughed loudly. Dogs barked, competing for scraps beneath the tables. The hall was filled with spectacle, but calculation was constant. Refusing a dish could insult the host. Eating heartily signaled trust. Toasting was ritualized. Goblets were raised not just in cheer but to affirm alliances. Every swallow was part of a performance. As nobles feasted, servants waited to collect leftovers. Chronicles describe tables cleared entirely, scraps brought to the poor outside. Whether this was true charity or a display of piety is debated, but the line of beggars made the contrast stark: excess within, hunger without. What stands out most is the theatricality. These feasts were political theaters. Kitchens became arenas of diplomacy. Spices signaled trade connections. Sugar sculptures displayed wealth. Roasts showcased abundance. Silence or the absence of a dish could send a message. Eating in a medieval hall was like reading a language written in bread, meat, and sauce. As the feast ended, the hall thickened with smoke and sweat. Candles guttered. Goblets sat empty. Guests slumped, full and flushed. Minstrels played softly. Voices lowered. Servants cleared bones and plates. Dogs licked greasy floors. Tomorrow the hall would smell sour, but tonight it still shone. Outside, the night was cool. Behind you, the castle glowed, kitchens still echoing. Ahead, stars stretched across the countryside, silent and sleeping. You realized medieval cooking was more than nourishment. It was display, influence, and manipulation. In noble halls, food became spectacle, and in spectacle, politics brewed unseen, shaping alliances as decisively as written treaties. The noise of the banquet faded, swallowed by the quiet countryside. Your path led away from castles, cloisters, markets, and hospitals, into the calm rhythm of a village night. Here, light was softer, air cooler, and the only sound came from hearth fires through half-open shutters. You entered a villager's kitchen after dark, where cooking was private, a slow, steady ritual. Household accounts note that evening meals were usually the simplest: bread, a little cheese, and a pot of pottage simmering low on the embers. Unlike feasts or markets, nothing demanded attention. Meals were functional, quiet, and shared by candlelight or firelight. Sitting on a rough bench, you understood this as the true face of medieval cooking: plain, uncelebrated, but steady as the seasons. One detail comes from soap bread, old loaves soaked in broth or ale to soften them. Families used trenches or leftover bread, ladling hot liquid to swell and soften it. Nothing was wasted, and the result was comforting on cold nights. Children might dunk crusts in the pot, steam curling upward, faces glowing in firelight. Another practice was keeping food warm overnight by placing it on the hearth's edge. Porridge or stew simmered slowly, ready to be ladled in the morning. A way families kept the pot alive. Waking before dawn, one could scoop from the same stew, its flavor deepened by hours of gentle heat. Scholars debate whether evening meals were fully communal or staggered. Some argue families always ate together, the hearth as a sacred gathering point. Others suggest hunger dictated order. Fathers or laborers ate first, then wives and children. You see a father dipping first, then handing the spoon to his wife, who ensures each child gets a portion. The truth blends care with hierarchy. The night kitchen soundscape is gentle. Logs pop and crackle. A baby whimpers, soothed with a crust dipped in warm broth. Dogs shuffle near the hearth, dreaming. Outside, an owl hoots. The fields are silent. Compared to noble feasts, this hush is restorative. Cooking here is about ending the day with warmth. Bread dominates, not white wheat, but brown, coarse loaves, sometimes mixed with bran or beans. A mother slices carefully, distributing evenly. Stewed peas or beans with leeks add substance. Cheese, crumbly and tangy, appears if goats or cows were kept. Stories accompany the meal. Chronicles describe families exchanging tales, voices low, bodies leaning close. Food nourishes both body and imagination. Fathers tell stories of saints or heroes as children chew slowly, weaving history into the act of eating. Candles or rush light sputter, smoke mingling with stew aroma. Flickering light softens faces, hides soot-stained walls, and brings a brief sense of magic. Poverty glows warmly for a moment. Hunger persists. Portions are small. Bowls are not always full. A child scrapes the last bit of broth. The mother gently saves some for tomorrow. Survival is measured spoon by spoon. Yet there is a faint smile. Tonight there is something hot to eat. Travelers noted the smoke in cottages at night, no proper chimneys, haze stinging eyes and lungs. Villagers tolerated it. Accustomed to life in the haze of wood smoke, you blink as your eyes water, realizing this is the cost of warmth and supper combined. When the meal ends, bowls are scraped clean, scraps tossed to the dog, and the pot nudged back toward the coals. Children curl into straw beds, bellies just warm enough to drift off to sleep. Parents whisper softly, their voices mingling with the faint hiss of embers. Silence deepens until only the steady breathing of sleepers and the occasional pop of burning wood remain. This nightly rhythm repeated for centuries, unchanged across villages. No gilded pies, no extravagant feasts, just bread, broth, cheese, and firelight. Yet in its simplicity lay the resilience of medieval life. Without these modest evening meals, there could be no markets, no guild banquets, no noble feasts. The grand stages rested on the quiet foundation of nightly bowls of pottage. Stepping out into the night, the cottage glows faintly behind you, smoke curling from its roof. Stars scatter across the fields, and the village lies hushed. You walk on, carrying the memory of warmth, of coarse bread and simple broth, of whispered stories by firelight. Medieval cooking was not only about survival or display, it was also about these small, steady home rituals. The quiet of the village hearth lingers as you move into the countryside, where the land itself tells the story of food. The wind carries the faint scent of tilled soil and manure, and in the distance, you hear the creak of a plow pulled by oxen. Tonight, your journey leads not to a kitchen but to the open fields where farming and food production began long before pots and pans transformed them. Without these fields, there would be no hearth, no market, no banquet. Cooking in the Middle Ages began with the soil. Historical accounts and agricultural treatises show that most medieval people lived directly from the land. Grain was king, oats, barley, rye, and where possible wheat. These grains became bread, pottage, and ale, staples of everyday life. Harvest time in autumn was intense. Men cut, women gleaned, children carried sheaves. A family's survival through winter depended on these weeks. Fields hummed with activity, air thick with the smell of ripe grain, laughter mixed with anxiety. A remarkable aspect of medieval farming was its communal nature. Villages worked under the open field system, where strips of land were cultivated by different families but rotated collectively. Fences were rare. Cooperation was essential. Families helped one another with plowing and sowing, and the rhythm of planting and harvesting connected the community. You can picture men trudging behind plows, breath steaming, while women scatter seeds across the soil. Food production was less about individual effort than collective coordination. Scholars debate its efficiency. Some say it wasted land, others insist it preserved the soil and ensured that everyone had a share. Standing in the windswept field, you sense both, the frustration of slow progress and the relief of shared survival. The soundscape of medieval agriculture was steady and harsh. Hooves thudded into mud. Plow blades scraped stones. Sickles swished through stalks. Carts rattled under the weight of sheaves. Voices rose across the fields, punctuated by dogs guarding livestock. It was not glamorous, but it formed the heartbeat of every medieval meal. Grain was vital, but not the only crop. Beans, peas, cabbages, and onions filled gardens and fields, supplementing the diet. Turnips and parsnips provided bulk, while leeks thrived in damp soil. Orchards of apples and pears dotted villages, their fruit stored in straw or pressed into cider. In autumn, the scent of fermenting apples drifted through lanes, sticky sweetness mingling with smoke. You imagine biting a crisp, tart apple, eaten fresh or stewed into pies. A curious detail emerges from farming records. Pigeons, now often nuisances, were prized food. Lords maintained dovecote towers filled with nesting pigeons, whose meat and eggs were delicacies. The cooing of doves became the rural estate's background music, wings supplying pies when other resources were low. Livestock shaped cooking as well. Pigs foraged freely in woods, grunting as they rooted through acorns. Sheep grazed hillsides, their wool more valuable than meat, though mutton contributed to stews. Chickens scratched in yards, their eggs slipping into pottages or custards. Cows provided milk for cheese and butter, their lowing echoing across the countryside. Each sound, the grunt, the bleat, the crow, was a promise of food to come. Yet famine was always near. A single poor harvest could plunge communities into hunger. Chronicles describe desperate years when bread was mixed with beans, acorns, or even ground ferns. You imagine tasting that bitter loaf, sustenance more than nourishment. Fields were generous yet unpredictable. Weather was discussed with as much intensity as celebrity gossip today. Chroniclers note years of unending rain rotting grain, or summers of drought when nothing sprouted. Food began and ended with the sky. A good year meant festivals, a bad one meant prayers, rationing, and thin stews. Standing in empty fields, you feel the terror of a failed harvest. Processing the harvest was a ritual itself. Women ground grain in querns or carried sacks to mills, where water wheels clattered as stones crushed kernels into flour. The smell of flour dust filled barns, coating skin and clothes. The miller, often mistrusted for skimming extra, was both essential and suspicious. Every loaf, every sip of ale began with this labor. The agricultural calendar shaped cooking. Spring pottages brimmed with fresh greens, sorrel, spinach, leeks. Summer brought fruit and fish. Autumn offered pork from slaughtered pigs, paired with apples and herbs. Winter relied on dried beans, salted meats, and pickled vegetables. Cooking mirrored the rhythm of soil and sky. One unusual custom tied directly to farming was the harvest feast. After the fields were cleared, villages celebrated with bread from the first grain, ale from the first malt, meat from freshly slaughtered pigs, shared in communal joy. These simple meals were sacred expressions of gratitude and hope for the next year. You can almost hear fiddles playing, mugs clinking, children darting between tables, while parents laugh despite exhaustion. The sensory richness of the fields clings as you leave: damp soil, sweet apples, smoke from burning stubble. You hear men guiding oxen home, wheels creaking, hens settling for the night. Food begins here, in toil and earth, long before kitchens add spice or fire. As twilight deepens, you step onto the road, fields stretching behind like patchwork quilts. Stars prick the sky, and the quiet of the medieval countryside remains with you. The land falls silent. You begin to realize that medieval cooking wasn't just about hearths, markets, or grand feasts. It was deeply rooted in the soil, shaped by the seasons, and reliant on crops and livestock. Every spoon of pottage, slice of bread, or mug of ale carried the history of plows, would yield, rain would fall, and the sun would shine. It was hope planted in furrows, harvested in sheaves, ground into flour, and finally stirred into the daily cauldron of life. The scent of damp fields clings to you as you move forward, yet your path now leads to a different kind of kitchen, a space belonging not to peasants, monks, or nobles, but to professional cooks who began recording their knowledge. You step into the world of medieval cookbooks, where recipes and culinary knowledge were crystallized in words and parchment. By the late Middle Ages, collections of recipes circulated among the wealthy. Famous examples include the Fermi of Curry, commissioned for King Richard II in England, and Levendier of Talavon in France. These texts were not practical guides for everyday villagers. They were manuals of status, documenting the dishes served in courts, elaborate sauces, spiced roasts, and delicate pastries. Recipes were reminders for skilled cooks, not detailed instructions. Imagine opening a manuscript to read, "Take hens, boil them, add almonds and sugar, and serve." No measurements, no precise times, just guidance for an experienced hand. An intriguing aspect of these manuscripts is their attention to color as much as flavor. Custards dyed green with parsley, sauces brightened with sandalwood, pies gilded with saffron or gold leaf. Court kitchens must have been alive with pots of rainbow-colored foods, each hue a sign of extravagance. To medieval diners, taste was only part of the experience. Visual spectacle was equally important. Historians still debate who actually used these cookbooks. Some argue they were practical tools for royal kitchens, preserving culinary tradition. Others see them as symbols of prestige, displayed to demonstrate refinement. Likely, both interpretations are valid. Cooks relied on them while lords displayed them without ever touching a ladle. You can picture a noble proudly showing a guest his leather-bound recipe book, yet unable to roast a chicken himself. The soundscape of this world is different from a smoky hearth or bustling hall. You hear quills scratching on parchment, pages rustling, and cooks dictating their actions into words. Pots still bubble, knives still clink, but in the corner, knowledge is being preserved. The aroma of ink mixes with the scent of stewing meats, a strange but profound union, where the ephemeral world of taste meets the permanence of text. Some recipes even include humor or riddles. Certain dishes were designed to surprise diners: mock eggs of almond paste, pies that released live birds, or roasts stuffed with multiple animals. These were not merely meals, they were performances. You can almost laugh at the sight of a guest cutting into a pie expecting venison, only for pigeons to flutter across the hall. Medicine and cookery also intertwined. Manuscripts often listed foods with healing properties: fennel to cool the body, ginger to warm it, almonds to soothe. Recipes were sometimes both dish and prescription. A chicken broth, for example, might be described as suitable for them weak of stomach, blending nourishment and remedy. These cookbooks also reveal social divides. Recipes call for saffron, ginger, sugar, and almonds, luxuries beyond the reach of ordinary villagers. Reading them transports you to a world of privilege. While peasants chewed dark bread, nobles followed instructions for gilded custards. Written words captured luxury, while oral traditions ensured survival. The kitchens that produced these texts were alive with sound and sweat. Apprentices ground almonds, stirred spiced wine, and plucked geese by the dozen. Masters dictated instructions to clerks: take this and add that, and stir until it be enough. Precision lived not on the page, but in muscle memory, senses honed through years of practice. The manuscript was the skeleton, the flesh was in the craft. Recipes also traveled. Some were copied by hand, gifted between households, or carried across borders, introducing French dishes into English kitchens and Italian custards to northern tables. Food became diplomacy, recipes crossing languages and lands long before printed books. You can picture a clerk by candlelight, carefully copying a French almond tart, ink blotting as he searches for a familiar translation of saffron. Memory, too, played a vital role. Most recipes existed in minds, not on parchment. Mothers taught daughters. Cooks instructed apprentices. Hands guided hands. The The surviving manuscripts are rare traces of a world where taste was fleeting. For every written recipe, countless others vanished into smoke, tongues, or forgotten pots. The sensory experience of these books endures. Imagine opening a page and sensing saffron centuries later, stained into parchment by golden fingers. Grease marks attest to a book left open in a smoky kitchen, broth spilling across its margins. Words carry scent and stain, tangible traces of meals long gone. Scholars still debate whether these recipes reflect true medieval taste or idealized versions. Did people truly crave sugar-rich meat stews, or were these dishes rare spectacles? Were instructions followed precisely, or did cooks improvise, dressing actions in fine words? Each recipe is evidence and enigma, tantalizing enough to make you hungry, yet never fully revealing its flavors. As night falls, you leave the scriptorium. The scent of ink and parchment fades, replaced by earthy smells, smoke from woods, damp soil, bread cooling on a shelf. Yet you carry with you the knowledge that medieval cooking was not only experienced, it was written, remembered, and preserved. Cookbooks transformed fleeting flavors into lasting words, offering a glimpse into not only what people ate, but how they imagined food. And a final realization strikes. Every gilded custard or almond tart bridges centuries. The scribbled words in these manuscripts let you taste, through imagination, the spiced, colorful world of a medieval kitchen. Cooking was not merely survival or spectacle. It became memory itself, inked, preserved, and shared across time. The faint scent of parchment and saffron lingers in your mind as you step back into the open night. Your journey has taken you through hearths and halls, bustling markets and quiet monasteries, fields and ships. Now, as the medieval world falls silent around you, it is time to reflect on what it has left behind. Tonight, you stand at the edge of modern life, considering the legacy of medieval kitchens and how their practices continue to influence what we eat today. It is well established in culinary history that many staples, bread, beer, cheese, pies, and stews, took shape during the Middle Ages. Techniques may have been rudimentary compared to modern ovens and mixers, but the foundations were set. The daily pottage of peasants, simmered over embers, survives in the hearty soups and stews we still enjoy on cold evenings. Roasted meats from noble halls evolved into the Sunday roasts we cherish. Even the communal act of breaking bread, central to village life, shapes how we gather around tables today. Some medieval quirks have proven surprisingly timeless. The communal bakehouse, for instance, has evolved into the neighborhood bakery. Villagers once carried dough to a shared oven. Now we stroll in to buy loaves baked by others. Coloring food with saffron or herbs continues in our attention to presentation, not gold leaf on swans, but colorful garnishes on plates. The desire for a touch of theatricality has survived, moving from castles to restaurants. Scholars still debate how much medieval food we would enjoy today. Some argue that the heavy spices and sweet-savory combinations would shock modern tastes. Others point out that dishes like spiced cider, fruit-filled meat pies, and almond-based desserts feel surprisingly familiar. Imagining a medieval table, you might find both comfort and surprise. Pottage warm and recognizable, yet venison sweetened with sugar, leaving you puzzled. Perhaps the greatest legacy is this blend of continuity and change. The sensory echoes are strong. A hunk of crusty bread connects you to a peasant breaking his loaf. A sip of ale recalls villagers who brewed for daily survival. A spoonful of custard links you to monks savoring a rare treat. Every modern meal carries whispers of medieval kitchens, faint voices through the smoke. Even our food fears trace back to them. Concerns about hygiene, spoilage, and fire remain, though today we combat them with refrigeration, fire codes, and food safety laws. Their dread of famine-shaped cooking, and it echoes in how we preserve, store, and regulate food. Our obsession with expiration dates is just another chapter in humanity's ongoing battle with spoilage. Another inheritance is the concept of recipes. Late medieval manuscripts became the ancestors of modern cookbooks. Today, we flip through glossy pages or scroll online for exact measurements, but the impulse to record, share, and teach cooking remains unchanged, tracing directly to scribbled notes on parchment. The soundscape of this legacy hums quietly around you. Modern kitchens buzz with stoves and refrigerators, yet the clatter of knives, the hiss of frying fat, and the smell of herbs remain ancient. Close your eyes, strip away appliances, and you could be in a medieval kitchen, the rhythm of chopping, stirring, and tasting unchanged. Here lies the most profound truth. Food has always been more than sustenance. In noble halls, it was politics. In monasteries, devotion. In cottages, survival. In markets, community. On roads and ships, endurance. This pattern persists. Meals still mark deals, faith, hardship, and connection. The medieval kitchen set the template, and we continue to live within it. One curious relic remains: pies. The medieval coffin, a thick crust used more as a container than food, evolved into the pastry pies we now enjoy. What began as a vessel for meat became a dish itself. Every bite of apple pie carries the memory of medieval cooks sealing venison in crust to preserve it. History lingers in sweetness. Even medieval caution about water persists. We drink filtered or bottled water, just as they drank ale to avoid illness. Their mistrust of rivers foreshadowed our concerns about contamination. The story of food is also a story of fear, quietly inherited. As you stand in this imagined twilight, the medieval world dissolves. Smoke, broth, and spice drift away. Knives, bells, and laughter fade. You realize that medieval cooking was never quaint or distant. It laid the groundwork for what we taste today. Your journey closes not with spectacle, but with continuity. Every loaf, soup, or sip carries centuries in its flavor. The medieval kitchen survives quietly in yours, in every recipe, every flame, every shared table. Now, as the embers of this long journey fade, you can slow your breathing. You've wandered through smoky halls and quiet gardens, bustling markets and silent monasteries, seas and fields, returning to your own kitchen. Each place had its smells, sounds, and flavors. Together, they weave a story both distant and familiar. You can feel coarse bread in your hands, hear a pot simmering, taste honey or ale. These imagined sensations across centuries are strangely comforting, reminders that humans in any era found solace in warmth, flavor, and shared meals. Let your mind rest in these images. Feasts fade to silence. Hearth smoke thins to cool air. Market bustle drifts like a dream. Picture yourself in a quiet cottage, the crackle of a dying fire your only sound, the faint scent of herbs and bread your only aroma. Outside, the medieval night is still, stars scattered above fields that fed countless generations. And you are part of that rhythm. Your meals may come from ovens instead of hearths, but the thread is unbroken. Cooking carries memory, survival, and care forward. Close your eyes, let the past settle gently, and drift like a quiet stream. Your story has carried you far. Sleep now comes easy, soft as bread, steady as fire, timeless as the taste of home.